Cassie and I were married for 5 years and dated for about 5 years before our wedding. Perhaps we can say that we have been in love since childhood. I was with a few girls before I went with Cassie, but she was only with one guy who was her brother, as far as I know. Everything went according to plan with our marriage. We both worked and saved enough money to start looking for our first home. Then the children will come. My career as a design engineer was going well, and Cassie planned to stay at home as soon as the kids arrived. Cassie was just as pretty as the day I saw her. She had shoulder-length brown hair and long, thick bangs that reached down to her eyes. Her dark eyes sparkled when she laughed. She was only 5 feet 3 inches tall, but she seemed taller because of the way she carried herself. I was a little bit average myself. There was nothing to talk about at all. I was standing under 6 feet and under 200 pounds. The best thing about me was that I still had hair. I was jogging at least 3 times a week, so I was in good shape. Life was good. The future was bright. It was light until we talked at night. Usually when we go to bed, we do one of 2 things: make love or go to bed. We never lay in bed with the lights off and didn't discuss any personal issues. It was a routine that both of us seemed comfortable with. Now I know why it was a good policy. "John, can we talk about something?" "What? Now? Can it wait until tomorrow?" She was silent for a moment. "John, my brother is here for a few days. Do you mind if I see him while he's here?" She captured my attention. Clayton Brenner was the only guy Cassie made love to besides me. When we were in school, he was a real cat dog. His family had money, and Clayton always dressed well and drove a fancy car. While the rest of the guys tried to keep our garbage heaps in working order, all the girls were attracted to him, and he had a choice. He will walk with one for a few weeks, and then he will leave her and take another. The girls knew what he was doing, but they still thought they were special. Unfortunately, Cassie was one of the people he used and abandoned. He used to brag about his victories in front of other guys who, as I discovered, were very low class. He was also considered pretty good in bed, and as far as I know, none of the girls ever complained about his behavior, including Cassie. Why are you asking me this now? I just don't want to do anything that you might not want to do. Where to? At the restaurant desk I got in. "Cassie, I don't like your brother very much." "I know, but we talked when we were still at school." "When did he call you?" "Yesterday." "Why are you telling me this now?" There was another moment of silence, longer than the first. I'm not going to comment on either. You do what you want to do. Let your conscience be your guide. I've always wanted to say that. I rolled over on my side, turning away from her. Everything was quiet for a while, and then I heard her crying softly into her pillow. She had never done this before. I lay perfectly still so that she wouldn't notice that I was still awake. She whimpered to herself for a long time and finally fell asleep. It was the longest night of my life. Why would she cry because of my refusal to condone her meeting with her brother? Why did she wait all day to tell me that he was in town? Why did he call her at all? Our conversation was short and not emotional enough to bring her to tears. I missed something. There was something I didn't understand. I've been tossing and turning all night trying to figure it out. Of course, my dilemma had a simple solution. All I had to do was ask her. Had she seen him before? Why does she want to see him? Was she going to make love to him? I was driving myself crazy. I knew I couldn't ask her any of those questions. Everything I learned will be gleaned from the information she gives me of her own free will without my asking. I felt it strongly and was determined not to give in to the easy way out. If she had told me, that would have been fine, but I didn't ask. I looked at my watch. It was almost 5 in the morning. I got out of bed and quietly went to the bathroom to relieve myself. I was still thinking. I tried a few mental tricks to stop it, but nothing worked. Before I left the bathroom, I looked at the basket. I slowly lifted the lid and looked inside. It was underwear for special occasions. She wore them on birthdays, anniversaries, and other holidays that were a reason to celebrate. Yesterday was not a special day. Trying not to make any noise, I got dressed and left the house. The Waffle House was always open. As I sat sipping my 3rd cup of coffee, my mind was racing at 1,000,000 miles an hour. I pushed the plate of half-eaten oatmeal away, paid the bill, and had no idea what I was going to do next. Emotions were raging. First of all, I was disappointed by my wife's infidelity. The second and rapidly growing feeling was revenge. Her brother made the mistake of calling my wife. He was a clever talker. Just the thought of him invading the sanctity of my marriage made me furious. A woman never forgets her first lover. And because Clayton was handsome and rich, it made everything much more difficult. Another thing is to take revenge on his wife. I knew what Clayton was doing. I wasn't sure what Cassie had done. Spirit and intention mean a lot to me. If she was doing something, then what was her motivation and what was she trying to achieve? I didn't feel like I could judge her until I knew more. On the other hand, I really didn't want to know more. I drove aimlessly around the city for hours until it was time to go to work. In the end, I convinced myself that I didn't want to know what Cassie had done or hadn't done. Knowing what would have affected our marriage anyway probably ruined it. I was determined not to let her explain her actions, no matter how hard she tried, if she tried at all. I was tired and depressed. I didn't want to go to work, or anywhere else for that matter. Cassie's already awake. I tried to imagine what was going on in her head, but I couldn't. There was too much going on in my head to think about what she was thinking. Now she knows that I realized that something had happened. I couldn't concentrate on my work in the office. Around 10 o'clock, the phone rang. "John, this is Cassie." Yes, there was a short pause on the other end of the line. "I'm going to visit my mother for a few days. Are you all right? How long does a few days last?" "About a week. Is this normal?" "Of course. Call me when you're ready to come home." "Thanks." There was another short pause. "John, I love you." I didn't answer. I quietly hung up the phone, sat down in my office, and cried quietly for the first time in many years. I spent the rest of the week on vacation, taking advantage of the accumulated sick leave. I knew I was going to do something stupid, but I didn't know what it was yet. The most likely scenario I could think of was that Cassie went to Clayton's motel restaurant and then went to his room. When she returned home, she felt guilty and tried to somehow confess to me what she had done. She waited until we went to bed so that I could take her confession a little better. The case was already done, and she was trying to get some kind of left-wing approval for me to justify or compensate for her misconduct. I didn't give her any slack, and now she had a real problem. She knew that I knew she wasn't being completely truthful, and she had no idea what to do next. Of course, I may be wrong. I spent the next 2 days making myself even more miserable. I stayed in the house and played these mind games over and over again. I felt like Cassie and I had a special relationship, and more than anything, I wanted to keep it. Any admission on her part will destroy the trust between us. Any questioning on my part will do the same. We were trapped. I was sure that she would want to confess everything to get rid of the guilt, and that she was ready to face the consequences that would follow. I didn't want her to admit it anymore, because I felt it would ruin our marriage. Cassie didn't appreciate the whole situation very well. What is Clayton? He was a skirt chaser who hunted married women, which he felt was the right thing to do since he had them before. He called me at home at my sanctuary to steal my wife. It was pretty easy to figure out where my aggression should be directed. I intend to solve part of my problem the next day, and I don't care what the consequences are. It wasn't hard to find out which room Clayton was in. I decided it was best to use a simple approach. I'm going to knock on his door, and when he opens it, I'm going to shoot the bastard. At that moment, I didn't care if they caught me or not. I wasn't going to make a big show of it, and I thought the low profile inside and out wouldn't be noticed. I chose the .22 Ruger. I'm not a big fan of guns. I don't remember the last time I used or even cleaned my pistols. I didn't have many of them. A shotgun, a hunting rifle, a .38 caliber pistol, and my Ruger. The problem today was that I couldn't find Ruger. I tried to figure out where I had put it or lent it to someone, but I couldn't remember. In the end, I just grabbed a Smith & Wesson and rushed to the Desca Hotel. Well, the next step in my plan didn't work out either. When I arrived at the motel, I found that the place was crowded with police cars. I put the gun under the seat and got out of the car. I casually walked towards one of the policemen. They were escorting the lady from Clayton's room. I was afraid to look. As they approached, I recognized the woman. It was Susan Bradford, an acquaintance of ours. She and her husband Barry graduated from high school with us. They moved to Reading so Barry could open a car dealership. It was sad to see Susan, but I was glad it wasn't Cassie. Susan was also one of Clayton's old victories. As she was being put in the car, I heard one of the policemen say, "No, she locked herself in the bathroom." We made her come out for a long time. Apparently, they fired from the 22nd Ruger. Soon they carried Clayton out in a sack. I can't say that I was too upset, but I was looking forward to sending him there myself. Well, there are days when everything goes awry. On the way home, I bought a pizza and a pack of beer. I spent the rest of the week making up for lost time in the yard and doing some repairs around the house. I didn't want to go back to work. And now that my fun with Clayton had been disrupted, I felt depressed. I saved a copy of the newspaper with the story of Clayton's death. The police had no evidence or witnesses. When Cassie returned home, the house was clean and dinner was served modestly. It was a great homecoming. We had dinner and chatted about how her mom and dad were doing. We were both very careful not to talk about anything controversial. I washed the dishes and brought her a cup of Earl Grey. She sat quietly, just looking at the fingers on her lap. She slowly raised her head. "John, I need to explain to you what." "Cassie, I'd rather not now, please. Maybe another time we can talk about it. I've had a hard week and I'm really not ready. But please listen to me. Have a nice tea." There was an awkward silence. I picked up the newspaper with the Clayton article and handed it to her. She was looking at me and silently reading the newspaper. She put down the newspaper and looked at me again, waiting for some sign of approval. I was silent. "I think I'll take a shower and go to bed early. I'm a little tired from the trip. I haven't been sleeping well lately. I'll sleep on the couch. Good night." "Good night, John." I watched her climb the stairs as I carried the cups to the kitchen. It looks like it's going to take time before everything gets back to normal. 2 weeks later, I returned to the bedroom. After about 6 weeks, we started making love again. It took 4 months before our relationship got closer to normal. It will never be the same again, but we were close. We didn't have any more late-night conversations. We never discussed this episode with Clayton. Cassie got pregnant. We were both happy. With the child, we need a new car, a station wagon, of course. I want to see Barry Bradford. He was in the process of divorcing Susan and wasn't shy about discussing it. It's a pity that she locked herself in the bathroom and couldn't identify the shooter. I said, "Ruger's sound is muffled," but she couldn't help but hear the shots anyway. Barry looked at me strangely. I was trying to figure out what I had said wrong. Our conversation up to this point had been open and frank, and it seemed to me that I had stumbled over my own language. "John, there was no mention in any newspaper article or on TV that she was locked in the bathroom." Well, I must have seen it somewhere. I didn't want to tell him that I was at the crime scene. I have all the clippings and all the information about what happened, and it was not covered anywhere. And the fact that the 22nd Ruger was fired was also not mentioned anywhere. The police kept this information secret in the interests of the investigation. I don't remember, but I must have heard it somewhere. Barry looked at me for a long time, saying nothing. He knew that Cassie was also a victim of Clayton's charm. A wide smile appeared on Barry's face. "John, I'm going to offer you the best deal for the best station wagon in this parking lot. Let's go and choose." I assumed that Barry had come to a certain conclusion from where I got the information that Susan was in the bathroom. He was wrong, but I didn't see the point in correcting him. Eventually, Barry got his own Ford dealership, and for the rest of my life, I got big discounts on a new car every 2 years. Cassie and I have 2 beautiful daughters. Our marriage continued to grow stronger despite one setback. When we attended social events, Cassie always tried to stay close to me. If at some point during the event some hopeful guy molested her, she would come up to me, take my hand, and whisper in my ear, "It's time." I always knew what that meant. This often happened because Cassie was turning into a real woman. She was aging well. Some of our regular hosts knew about this little quirk of hers and started reacting to it too. When they saw Cassie and I leaving early, they started investigating. It has become a common game in our circle. The 20th class reunion came and we drove to Lancaster. It was like all the meetings with a lot of handshakes and bullshit. It was going pretty well and we were having a good time. As the evening drew to a close, a well-dressed, well-groomed lady approached the table. It was Janet Brenner, Clayton's widow. She came up to us, held out her hand, and invited us to dance. I looked at Cassie and she nodded that everything was fine. It was a slow dance, and I tried very hard not to do anything inappropriate. The song ended, and we were left standing on the dance floor. She was facing me and holding both my hands. Clayton had an electronic notebook. When the police returned his things to me, the book was on. I don't know why they didn't save it, or at least read it. I read the whole book several times and then I destroyed it. I've been waiting for this opportunity to personally thank you for making my last 12 years absolutely wonderful. My new husband is the most wonderful thing that has ever happened to me, and it would never have been possible without you. I knew what she meant, and I didn't have the heart to tell her she was wrong. I decided that I wouldn't lose anything if I let her believe in her fantasies. I kept my best and passive face and let her talk. I do not know exactly what was in his book, but it seems that she was able to put it all together and decided that I had freed her. I looked back and saw Cassie watching intently. I walked Janet to her seat, and the big menacing man stood up. "John, this is my husband, Harold Stanton. Harold, I want you to meet John Wagner." "John, it's great to finally meet you. Janet and I appreciate everything you've done for us." I thought my hand was going to turn blue because he was squeezing it so hard. "I'm glad to see that everything turned out so well for you guys. I hope you will have many good years together." It was stupid, but I was at a loss. I smiled and nodded my head slightly. Returning to my table, I noticed that Cassie was sitting with her head down. When I sat down, she started talking. We were both tired and reading was about 2 hours away. There was a bit of talk about what happened during the evening, but nothing about Janet. We returned home, checked on the children, and went to bed. Everything was quiet, but I knew she was awake. "John, yes? What did Janet tell you?" "Janet told me that she and her new husband are very happy, and that I have to thank you on her behalf." I lied. It was very quiet in the dark bedroom. Cassie lay very still and still. I couldn't even hear her breathing. Our life continued in happiness. We forgot that incident with her brother.